brown shirt on. I'll just load in screen share. Here it is. And put up my video here. Start screen share. And here's the webinar, which you can see. And I'll just start off. There's Practical EQ webinar. This is about the Doublechecker, and it's yours truly presenting it. And there's the website. Today's agenda is very simple. We're going to start off with introducing the Doublechecker component, talk about Doublechecker characteristics, then move on to TOPDOG and cars, then talk about the social skills and objections and how you gain commitment with Doublecheckers, and then discuss personality dissonance in the Doublechecker, and then look at the combinations of the mover Doublechecker, the Doublechecker hustler, the Doublechecker artist, the Doublechecker politician, and Doublechecker engineer. And we'll take off with that. Right, so let's start off. The thing about the Doublechecker, I like this picture. First of all, the main key aspect of the security of the Doublechecker is you've got to remember that their dominant desire is the desire for security. So they are right into things like safety, as I say, privacy, etc. And then on the right, you've got a picture. This is from Walter Blackburn. This is his sort of character maps. And you have this chap, and classically dressed, brown tie, looking at data. Doublecheckers make very, very good administrators, slightly worried about things as usual, and sort of files and papers behind. But that's, remember. So the big thing when you first think about Doublecheckers is remember that they're driven by the desire of security, and their first question is always, what are the risks? So looking at, as I said, desire for security, in terms of the five-factor theory, what they match up with is their higher agreeableness. One of the great things about Doublecheckers is that they are, if your Doublechecker is high, you're a compassionate, sympathetic, and humble person. That's you at the right end of the spectrum. If your Doublechecker is low, and you're in the bottom, on the left-hand side of the curve, you're a bit effectively impulsive, but you do have very high resilience. Things don't get you down. You don't worry about things. You can bounce back. Whereas for people who are Doublecheckers, it's an issue. So we then go on to the next item, which is the Doublechecker subcomponents. I mentioned this before dealing with the mover, that in fact what you have is subcomponents for each of the Doublechecker. So these are what Chandler McLeod used to analyze a Doublechecker into 5 subcomponents. First subcomponent is your propensity to have depressive feelings. So you get worried and you're pessimistic. Second subcomponent is having feelings of inferiority. And that's one thing about Doublecheckers. They don't think they're good enough, and they worry about things. They have free-floating anxiety. This is depressive component C. So that they're anxious. Have you locked the doors? I don't believe you. I'm worried about what's going to happen to my children. They spend their whole time worrying about lots of things. Then depressive D is low energy episodes. What can happen is a person who's a Doublechecker can get into episodes of feeling of like not doing anything. Just it's all too much. Now, there is on the other side, however, a thing called, one of the psychologists just at Chandler McLeod told me, he called it the D drive. What can happen is a Doublechecker can suddenly take up something, an interest, and approach it with surprising energy. A good example of this is my wife, who is a Doublechecker. She's got a lot of it in her personality, in her temperament, and she took up golf, and she attacked it with much more passion than I did. And so, as I said, that's one of the sort of characteristics of Doublecheckers, that they do occasionally show the Doublechecker. Finally, they have an ambivalence regards to courses of action. They don't know what to do. They said, should I do A or should I do B? What are the risks of doing A? What are the risks of doing B? they spend a lot of time worrying about courses of action. So that's the 5 subcomponents. The next thing is, so we got this is a nice cartoon character. I've got several of them. So we have these double checkers. They're humble, as I say, compassionate, sympathetic about people, do tend to be negative and pessimistic about life, typically do lack self-belief. They don't think they're good enough, and they can be a whinger. There's no doubt about it. They can sort of get on people's nerves because they whinge a lot, they complain a lot. As I said, they're very cautious, anxious, and apprehensive. They look at all sides of an issue carefully, and I just think this is such a tremendous cartoon. Really sums no, yes, maybe yes, maybe no. So to people, they appear as procrastinators and indecisive. And this is another great cartoon of a double checker. I love the graph going down. The computer doesn't work, and she's taking some form of Alka-Seltzer or medicine. They have a readiness to pause and consider. They like to think about things and worry about them. A good feature of them is if they're working with slow people, they can slow down. A lot of people find working with slow people frustrating, but the great thing about double checkers, they can slow down and work at that pace. And then finally, they tire easily. So you can't get, if you're giving them a serious task, don't expect them to work 24 hours full bore. They'll work well for about 6 hours, and so you should set them tasks around that, but then they want to go. And then, as I said, but they do have the D drive where they can take up an activity with a penchant. So, as I said, you're it's just a set you're going. I just hope this is live. I'm worried I may not hit the right button. Anyway, we'll continue on. We'll go through, etc. I have this desperate theory that something has gone wrong. All right. Okay. Next presentation. Okay. TOPDOG. Right. This is how you recognize double checkers. Again, a great cartoon here, and it's a wonderful office of a double checker. What they look like. Several of the things. First of all, you can see in the office, and I've got it down at the bottom there, so I'll talk about that in a moment. But the first thing about double checkers is when you meet them, they're hypochondriacs. When you ask them how are they, they'll immediately come up with a number of things that are wrong, and they'll ask you, and they'll be really happy if you could mention several things wrong with it yourselves. Another key thing if you're talking about double checkers is they really like to talk about family, because families represent security. In terms of organization, you find them in insurance companies, because insurance is about avoiding risk. Public transport monopolies. Security is very important in public transport, safety, for example. So they really do. And of course, the other big pool of double checkers in the world is in the public service. If you look at like a Yes Minister, Humphrey is a classic double checker in action. And the public service, I call Canberra D City because it's got a lot of, obviously double checkers. Positions, right, they make very, very good administrators. You find a lot of double checkers are teachers, and you find a lot of nursing because they're very compassionate, sympathetic people. They like getting a task done. They like finding things, right? Dress, we'll talk about more about that, but they like the earth colors. Another big giveaway is women have very full handbags because they keep everything in there for every opportunity. They love high quality, and they love Burberry. They love the Burberry scarves, and brown. The brown of Burberry, of course, is famous worldwide. As I said, this is a great cartoon for an office of a double checker. And by the way, you can see she's wearing a brown cardigan, which is fantastic. But you see the pills on the desk, which is a classic sign of a hypochondriac. The picture behind of the family. They don't get divorced, double checkers. So the husband's in there with the children. And children are very, very important to double checkers. First thing you want to do is a bond is asking if they have children. If they say yes, start talking about them, right? In terms of, and they don't throw anything away, so you can see the files there, sort of stuck in the office, because you never know when you might need it in the future. In terms of Gambit, they tend to be on time, and they're very friendly. They do use first names pretty quickly. So that sums up TOPDOG. terms of cars, of course, there's one car which is famous at Doublecheckers, which is the Volvo. And I just picked up this ad. I mean, it's just homing straight in. It's slightly high tech, but you know, Volvo takes kids' safety to new heights. Showcases customized SUV featuring an innovative baby seat. Well, a Doublechecker would be right in it. The only mistake in this ad is it should really have tan seats and the person in tan, because brown is more their color, etc. But however, the Volvo has positioned itself as, of course, as a safe car. The safety was their sort of major thing. But the cars that they like, they tend to drive Toyotas. Color, if it's not earth colors like a brown, beige, etc., it's a white sort of. They like white cars because white cars are reputedly safer. So that's a classic. So a white Toyota or a brown Volvo is a classic example of a Doublechecker. And you notice the way they drive; it's very risk averse. And if you're behind a Volvo driver, you've been stuck behind a Volvo driver, you know what I mean. Right, colors, as I said, Burberry is their ideal. There you have a classic brown, the brown Mac and the brown scarf. What I also liked about this outfit was the very, very big sort of tote bag. That is classic example of a mover in action. Sorry, a Doublechecker in action. The big handbag is a very, very good giveaway of a Doublechecker. So just remember, when you're thinking Doublecheckers, you think earth colors, browns and tans, etc. Right. Social skills. All right. When you're dealing with a Doublechecker, you've got to remember the desire for security is paramount in their mind. And their first question is always, what are the risks? What can go wrong? And you have to address this issue. You can't just sit there. If you say there are no risks, you will lose the Doublechecker. You say, no, there are risks. And then you discuss how you mitigate it. You manage to mitigate the risks. Another thing when you're dealing with them, you don't offer them choices. You say, make up their mind for them. And I'll give you an example of how I do this, in fact, in my own life. Is, as I said, with my wife, okay, she has issues in the sense that she's a celiac, and that means she's got to have gluten-free food, and thankfully that's improving. But often what will happen if we go out for dinner and she'll look at a menu, and even with a wide range of gluten-free food, she goes, oh my God. Normally she's complaining that there isn't enough choice, but when there's too much choice, just another issue. And what I'll often do is say, right, well, why don't I have X and you have Y? And if you don't like Y, don't worry, we'll switch. And that does several things. It reduces the risk, we're going to say it wrong, makes up their mind for them, and basically sort of comes up with zero choice. Another thing to remember, the Doublechecker is, as a clue, is meet them on Monday morning. What happens to the Doublechecker during the week, if let's say they're at an office, etc., is they work during the week and they gradually get increasingly dissatisfied. And by Friday afternoon, they just have basically had it. All they want to do is get home to the family and get away for the weekend. 2 days with the family, that's enough. And by Monday morning, they want to get back in the office. So there's this little peak of optimism on a Monday morning. And for example, where I've used this was when I was a manager at T&T and we were selling payroll management systems. So obviously, in the payroll area, you want your payroll masters to be Doublecheckers. So a lot of the times when we're talking to end user recommenders, they're going to be Doublecheckers. And when I arrived, the company used to meet on a Monday morning, and they effectively, we were wasting what I'd say the Monday morning meeting for a sales meeting. So what I did is I shifted the sales meetings to a Tuesday. I said, no, Monday mornings are too valuable. We have to be meeting clients on Monday mornings because a lot of our clients are going to be Doublecheckers, and it's a good time to meet them. And in fact, it resulted in increased business. So it was a good move. So that's just one tip when you're dealing with Doublecheckers, meet them on a Monday morning. Okay, objections. Because they're anti-change, these are a number of objections. This is one of my favorite photos. It's Woody Allen in the crowd with three of the most beautiful women in the world looking miserable. Look again at Woody Allen in the center there, wearing a brown he's got brown sweater on, brown trousers. Absolutely perfect photo. Now, some of the things about Woody Allen. What are some of the things their objections. Well, common objections are, I won't make a decision now. They're also incredibly loyal to existing suppliers. Another objection you may have is they don't like your company. They think it's too risky. It's going to go under. And they do worry about that. You know, they've met other, well, they probably had their own experience where a company is basically, they've signed up, used them, and 1 year later basically gone out of business. Okay. And then finally, they'll spend a lot of time going over your proposition and then coming back to you and saying your proposition is not good enough. It's too risky. So these are sort of, so what I'm saying about this, the sale to a double checker is a protracted sale. It takes time, and you just have to sort of deal with that and realize that if you are selling to a double checker, you have to make that investment. Commitment technique. Well, the secret with the double checker is that you have to assume the sale. And I've got an example here where you got a financial planner, right, talking with the client. Right. And the best strategy for low risk investing is dollar cost averaging combined with diversification. So an example here is you have $250,000 to invest. What we'll do is we'll put $50,000 a day into this BT dividend imputation fund and $200,000 into ING cash. Then each month we'll invest $50,000 in 4 other funds. This will give you a diversification in terms of different funds. And then secondly, you will be basically using dollar cost averaging. This is the least risky approach to investing. That's what we will do. Do you get the idea? That's how you assume the sale. You say, this is the best strategy. This is the best option. This is what you must do. And assume the sale, by the way, is incredibly powerful. It's unbelievably powerful as a technique. And I once used it. I can remember using it in a school function where, you know, the thing where you have to collect and sell things for charity. And it was extremely amusing because I started at one end of the room and this other chap started at the other. And there were 10 tables. And of course, each person he goes to is, you know, you're selling tickets. And it was the usual thing, you know, 1 for $5, 3 for 10, you know, 10 for 20. I just said 10 for 20. And they looked at me and I said, you know, what can I win? It's a school charity. It's $10 to $20. And just held out my hand. And I got the $20 and I gave him 10 tickets. Then I went to the next one. Same procedure. Never, I don't think I discussed any of the prizes. I just said, and I just say, it's a school charity. One guy said, well, I'm not giving it to you. I said, doesn't worry me. Next person. You stand here and be the only person that refuses. Anyway, it was very funny. So what happened was, I ended up covering 8 tables at the same time as the other person working the other covered 2. And it was very amusing because afterwards, and this is when I was much younger with my children at school, and a chap came to me and said, that was fantastic. I said, what do you mean? He said, you were doing assume the sale. It was absolutely brilliant. Are you looking for a job? And I said, well, actually, I'm working at X at the moment, so I'm quite happy. I said, running a sales team. And he said, well, that was just a wonderful example of someone assuming the sale. So congratulations. And anytime you're looking for a job, here's my card. You've got a job with me. So it was a nice compliment. Right. Managerial styles. I've got up here Robbie Williams, classic depressive. I mean, he was a manic on one side. Mover, we will see later, mover double checker is not uncommon. But here he is. They're good at administration, finance, and service positions. D's find it hard to terminate staff. They worry about them, what would happen, put themselves in their shoes. This is because they're very compassionate, sympathetic people. Tend to be, as I say, cautious decision makers, see all the risks, and spend time complaining about the present, but they're actually anti-change. However, you must have in your organization or in your chief executive group a lot of some double checkers, because they are the ones who basically say, hey, have you thought of this? And I will never forget the first course I ever did, Kevin Chandler, and it was a sales training course. It was the first one he ran. So we were all in there, the movers, the hustlers, the politicians, the classic sales mix. And of course, when we came to the double checker, oh, we don't want to be like that. These people are terrible. They're administrators, boring. And Kevin Chandler said, no, 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 no. One of the important things when you're building a team is you basically don't make the mistake that people often make, which is basically hire people like themselves. And he then related a story where one of the things they did was do a site profiles of an executive team. And he went to see this chap, and the chap was in fact a mover, very, very high end, with a lot of politician, classic CEO profile. And Kevin Chandler came back to the chap with the report on his executive team, and the chap started off by saying, well, don't I have the best executive team in Australia? And Kevin said, well, unfortunately you don't, you've got a big problem. And he said, what's that? And he said, well, you've hired everyone like yourself. It's all filled with mover politicians, and there's no double checkers in there. And he said, there's not anyone. And he said, you're in property development. It's a risky game. It's cyclical. And you've got to have people who'll see the risk. And the chap, I never forget this, looked at Kevin Chandler and said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever had of, your brief is over, get out and I'm not paying you. And it became actually a break for Kevin for two reasons. One, the company actually went down. It was the largest failure in Australia. The company was called Mainline, and it was a property development company. But he was able to use that lesson or that discussion and get to Leighton Contractors, where he met Walt King, who was a big mover politician with a lot of hustling as well. But he explained the story, and Walt King listened, and then effectively his number two guy was a chap called Dieter. And of course, Leighton Contractors was a fantastically successful business. It sort of grew dramatically, mainly because Walt King was in there, but he made sure that every idea or every proposal he had went past Dieter first. So that's just the manager. So this is sort of the things. As I said, the good administration, and you do want to have at least one of them on your executive team in finance, etc. Oops, wrong way. Sorry. Okay, personality dissonance. This is how double checkers come across, particularly in business. They're actually insufficiently proactive. They just don't right. They're too reactive. They wait for people to come to them. In terms of salespeople, they don't ask for commitment. They're frightened of getting rejected, and they get anxious. They leave too much to others, and they propose too many alternatives. Again, I had a wonderful example of this with my wife. I came home one night, she was sort of all upset. And I said, what's the problem? And she said, I'm the worst salesman in Australia. And I sort of didn't deny the fact, but I said, what's the issue? And she was at school, right? And at the school function. And they were organizing a massive thing of charity auctions. And one of the things you do is you go around the various shops and say, is there anything you want to give to the charity auction? This is for Queenwood School, which is in Mossman. So she's in there talking to the shop, and goes to the shopkeeper, and the guy has a lighting shop or something. So he turns around, she gives the pitch and says what it's for, and he says, right, you can have that lamp over there if you'd like. And she looked at it and said, oh, that's too expensive. And he said, no, I'm offering you the lamp. Are you sure you don't want to offer me something else? And he goes, no, take the lamp. And again, she tried to say, no, it's too much and too expensive. And finally, after 10 minutes, he looked at her and said, lady, you're the worst salesperson in Australia. You said, take the lamp. I'm happy. I want to get rid of it. I can try it off against stock. I don't need it. You are the worst salesperson I've ever met. Well, of course, she took this personally, and that was it. So, as I said, these are sort of emphasis, the double checkers. They don't worry about profit, okay? They waste a lot of time getting to the point, and they leave the hard calls to last. They don't like sort of, I think the phrase is eating the frog. I mean, not doing something that's difficult. So that's how D's come across in business. And of course, there's two groups of people who don't like that in particular. Those are hustlers, because hustlers like making decisions and being winners, and etc. And the other ones are movers. Movers tend to be impulsive, quick thinking, quick decisions, and don't want to procrastinate around in all the detail and wallow in it. So those are the two risk groups. If you're a double checker, they're hustlers, and movers can be overwhelming. Right, mover double checkers. Now what happens is, if you go back to the beginning and go to look at my other introductory to emotional intelligence talk, I talk about one of the sort of how the mental illnesses are the drivers for double checkers. And of course, double checkers are driven by depression. But the classic mental illness is the bipolar personality order, which is, in fact, is a combination as the mover and the double checker. So what you can have is people who swing on these moves. And what happens is it all depends on how strong the normal is. I mean, a lot of people have this combination, females in particular. They're driven by the desire to communicate. Family is important. They love talking on the phone. And so they can be sort of cyclical. Anyway, I just always like this. I thought it was a nice joke. I hate being bipolar. It's awesome. It's a classic example of a double checker at the moment, and then basically a mover underneath. Sort of. So that's the swing. Next combination is double checker hustlers. That's in page 117 of the book. And if you go to 117 of the Humm Handbook, you'll see me talking about double checker hustlers there. They're pretty interesting people, actually. They often suspicious that there's something wrong with a proposed product, and that the price is too high. And as I said, in the same way ferrets hunt out choice rabbits in their burrows, DDHs try to ferret out the best deal possible. They take a long time to reach a decision, and they're always nibbling away for something better. And I've had some wonderful examples of that. People. One of the best examples I can remember is a John Cleese film. And they're talking about awkward customers. And one of them, they in fact called a ferret, right? And he was playing a travel agent, and the woman was a client. She was classic, big handbag, look there, bit of gold on the wrist. And she said, am I insured on my flight? And he goes, yes. And she says, well, suppose the plane crashes, will I get insurance? And he goes, yes. And she said, for the whole trip or just the bit I hadn't completed? Of course, John Cleese is a bit bemused by this, but he always remembers is just nibbling away. And if you've ever worked for one, I mean, I've worked with several. I mean, they're just unbelievable. Okay, how they ferret away, but they actually do get there in the end. Okay, and there are, if you can get one on board, they're fantastic reference cells, because their reputation is known to being basically people who sort of ferret out the best deal available. And so they make great reference cells if you can get double checker hustler on board. Double checker politicians, well, here's two of the cartoon characters, and you can see it's a real contrast. So one is very, very decisive, makes decisions, while the other one is very worrisome. And this can cause a tremendous conflict. And what happens is, whether they are successful or not depends on how high their normal is. And of course, on the right, we have dear old John Howard, who's one of the famous double checker politicians of our time. Labour used to try to pin basically that he was a ditherer, and he is cautious, and he was compassionate. I mean, he managed to, basically put in place the gun laws in this country, even though the Nationals, who were his coalition partners, were trying to stop it. He was very compassionate, very sympathetic, and said, I'd rather not have a government if I can't get this through. And he got it through. And it's unbelievable that he managed to do that. But he was renowned for being a dither. But on the other hand, he's incredibly good with words, etc. And what happened was, of course, he had also very high normal. And that combination of D and P, but with high normal, turned him into one of Australia's most successful prime ministers. And he's a very amiable, agreeable guy. And that sort of tempers, again, you never heard, you often hear politicians being accused of being arrogant. Rarely did you see John Howard being accused of being arrogant. So double checkers politicians are really interesting. As I said, it's on page 110. It's a pretty full extension. They basically, you got to put the positive. If you got one as an employee, you stress the good points of your new proposals when you do it, because double politicians will see basically the bad points themselves. You often find them as becoming admin or administration managers, and they make decisions carefully, but once having made, will adhere to it. Staff often fear them because they're often pretty critical of staff. They can be sort of slightly abusive in their relationships. So double-checker politicians is an interesting combination. Double-checker artists, well, they're the classic nice guy. They're very highly introverted. Again, very, very loyal people, but pretty introverted. Again, they're not very good managers. These two components are basically very compassionate, very sympathetic. So again, they find it very, very difficult to basically terminate poor performers. So there, as I said, page 118, you'll see on that combination, you'll see basically the double-checker artists. Okay, conscientious, loyal, very, very careful decision makers, and they will ask for support. Then you finally have double-checker engineers. Again, I have a section on that, basically on 114. They basically, as I said, not only do they find fault with the proposal, they find fault with excruciating detail. Basically, the secret is to let them complain about their present methods as much as possible. So if you need to appeal that it needs to change, and also demonstrate how simple your proposal will be to implement. Basically, DEs, after any tedious meetings, may decide that your product is a promising solution. So it takes quite some time to basically make the sale. You need considerable documentation about the technical qualities. So that gives the combination of the sort of the double checkers as we talked about. Right, so that concludes our session on the double checker as common. They're driven by the desire for security. That's the key thing to remember. And the first question in their mind is, what are the risks? They're agreeable, however. They're compassionate, sympathetic people. So when they ask you how you are, wallow about it a bit, talk about your situation. They're hypochondriacs. And there's a lovely saying, misery loves company. Well, that was coined with double checkers in mind. They, earth colors, browns, beiges, greens, etc. Very, very family orientated. One of the great ways of getting on the double checker, ask them about their family. And if they've got children, talk about their children. They're very loyal people. As I said, they don't get divorced. Constantly critical, but basically anti-change. Double checkers are great administrators and number twos. And if you are trying to get their cooperation, remember, you keep it simple, discuss the risks, okay, and then you assume the deals. Well, that wraps up the bit of double checker. We're doing, next one will be on the artist. So oops, what happened there? I don't know, it flipped, there we go. No, still learning about this, those etc. Anyway, so I hope you all enjoyed that. Next broadcast will probably be the second week of Wednesday on the February, and we'll discuss the artist and look forward to seeing you then. And I hope I know most of you are going to be watching this subsequently, so I hope you enjoy it. I'll just test it to make sure that it has worked out and I've got talking. Right, so anyway, have a good weekend and good time. Bye.